Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Mr. Within episode. The title is The Billion-Year-Old Science Project. It is a concept that it's a certain way I've approached the universe that begins to value the purpose of life in the journey that it has come so far. And since it has come, evolution has evolved to a certain point, that is enough reason for its continuation. Kind of like when the person made it to the finish line, then it was actually accepted, the level of skill. I consider that I can definitely play a different song. Okay. All right. Pretty much humanity, I began to perceive it as a science project. Scientists tell us it took about 4 billion years. I guess that's from the point that we were bacteria to the point that, we survived and we came to be man. It has taken a long time to be a creature on this planet with this sort of ability. And now we have a sort of ability which is an entrance into a conceptual realm. People are not just physical creatures, they're physical creatures with inner non-visible value. It doesn't mean there is no value, there is no intelligence. It doesn't mean your thoughts are nowhere. Your thoughts are of a design, but they are a design so elegantly imprinted upon the world that suddenly, from just everything in the world being stuff, everything became objects with names. So that's a level of our intelligence. That's a unique evolution. Any creature that has arrived towards that station of evolution, they begin to realize that their responsibility has reached a certain level of experience externally, and now their responsibility becomes internal. And especially any being who is in this life, if you are just honest, you will automatically have a deep perception of life. Because the biggest issue is, one can say life is a game, but the biggest issue is the game you play defines your destiny. And the most important skill in life, I think, is to comprehend which games to play, which games not to play. For example, and these games are not per se physical games, they are belief patterns, they are belief loops, they are ideological loops. For me, when I was looking for truth, I was denying truth a texture beyond my sensory perception. It's like the telescope is used to see from a distance, in a more closer view, to see something in the distance. Now, similarly, philosophy is a sort of inspiration towards one trying to comprehend the macrocosmic justification for existence rather than just limiting itself to the microcosm. We are creatures that, like how knights back in the day and many warriors wore armor. Our armor is no longer just physical. It's no longer just metal, like metal stuff on our skin. Our armor is the ideas that become the world, that are generated in our moment of awareness. So this billion-year-old science project, and there's many speculations. I believe Noam Chomsky had a very incredible way of speaking about language in this evolving ape, chimpanzee, or whatever. So he said that language was imported. That means language is like suddenly an inner dimension found. He didn't say that. That's how I concluded. I conclude that language is what I consider to be the mind is actually an attention to the first sense of self that is, in some sense, being the first corner of the room. So what I'm saying is, we're creatures where the body seems that it's in one dimension, just the physical dimension, but we see what is in the current experience, seeing a body. Like when you look at your body, the seer within and the object receive, the observer and the objects of observance, there is a sort of veil between them. There is a sort of a wall between different dimensions, the subjective realm and the objective realm. That's where consciousness seems to take place. It seems to take place between, in the journey in between the known and the unknown. Our eyes have opened to a changing world. And if the world didn't change, then we would be just a photo. We would be a sort of eternal photograph of reality. But this world changes, and in its change, it gives a potential for this evolved, sophisticated, advanced ape to, in some sense, suddenly begin to distinguish. It's as if your relationship with yourself honestly suggests your relationship with others. Because if the way you experience yourself is bound to thoughts that are not you, people can believe they have to behave in a certain way. Uh, but belief does not assure. It's only direct experience. That means, like, imagine you've never ate ice cream and somebody comes up to you and it's like, hey man, have you heard of ice cream? Like, imagine like you're a kid or something, you know? And so, like, your friend suddenly has this new ice cream, this kind of like, what were they called? Or, I don't know, something. You begin to see it's something that you can look from the outside as much as you want, but you got to go inside. And what that means is, at first, when data hits the individual, especially in our current mainstream, like, our mainstream notion of normality, everybody has their guard up whenever they step out of the house. They subconsciously do, even if they're not consciously aware. Um, we contain the world, or we can say the world extends as far as our greatest vision, our inner world. I've done certain unique, a very unique kind of like what meditation was for me was not trying to find some sort of hidden paradise. It wasn't, I didn't care. It's not I didn't care, I had no preference. As if, like, the idea of enlightenment was like somebody asking me what's the taste of water. Do you know? It's like, for me, it didn't seem to have anything to do with this world. So thinking about it in this world seemed ridiculous. So what I eventually did is I sat down. I sat down in nature, and something I just know, like I kind of realized it from yoga, is that the breath is very important to your consciousness. Your consciousness has a relationship with your breath, and your breath is a sort of, you can say, playfully conscious energy moving in a biological suit. Your body lives for what moves it, and what moves it seems to be an intelligence. And once our individual intelligence scopes around everywhere, it will eventually wonder about what's within it. So the concept of within is very important, actually. But it's important in a way where it's not blind, like the scholar's pride or the violent man's kind of uh, self-proving. Like, it's one of those things where you recognize, after billions of years, we've evolved to have a unique civilization with different technology. I was like, I was on the subway today, And I just looked at people. I'm like, and I suddenly got like some deep view of things, and I was like, oh my god, we're just creatures that used to be in the forest. Now we've put on shirts, and clothing, and we're sitting in tools of in technologies of our own creation, trying to act like everything is okay and everything is normal. For me, it's a sort of evolution seemed to be an escapism out of a savage wilderness to a luxurious order, towards a luxurious harmony. That means if you ask most people why do you want to be rich, they want to be rich most honestly, I think, because they don't want to work. Or maybe there's creative reasons or some other kind of reason. But when you ask someone why do you want, like they say they want to be rich, they want to be rich because they want to exist in a moment where conditions don't rule the person. We all seek freedom, you know, because without freedom, this universe would be empty. That means freedom is you being in an empty room and suddenly leaving it. Leaving, like when you leave your house, you have left the emptiness and the form of one room to enter another. And for me, the minds seem like this kind of infinitely branched out hallway of rooms. And it seemed like one of those things where the way how can I say it? My mind was something I was trying to control. I was a bit foolish in that regard because I felt power was important. Power is not important, intelligence is important. And intelligence recognizes the more violent the surface of Earth is, the less innovation can grow. That's simple. All these people, any person who adds to violent imagery, I mean, you can even call war art. It's as if they asked this general, like, I'm making this up right now, but I think I'm pretty like the reason I'm making this up because it's something I think it's been done. I just don't know if it has. I'm not sure in that regard. But it's the idea. It's as if like they blame this guy who started war, and they tell him, why did you do it or something? And the guy's like, I was being an artist. This is my artistic expression. This war where millions of people have died, and so you begin to see aside from just the inner freedom that we give phenomena, there's a certain rules of the universe. I remember, like when I was young, I, you know, dabbled with the Rubik's cube, and upon completion, I began looking for the next puzzle, and the next great puzzle became my mind. My mind became of interest for me because I noticed I am never wondering about the cause of my mind. I'm constantly wondering about the effect of my mind. And I wondered, okay, where does if you kind of like pull the string and try to see where the cause of the mind is, what do you recognize? So when I was like in nature, just sitting down on this grass field, kind of like paying attention to my breath, but also in that moment forgetting everything and just wondering why nature is here. And I concluded that it transcends the language threshold. That means language cannot contain what is truly here. Language is just a side simulation. It's a duplicate. It's a copy. Language is a clone of the world being molded by our inner realms. And it's very important because language defines the person. So when I speak, I feel I speak in an uncommon way. Because for me, there was a time where I was trying to be the most perfect, good guy. Do you know what I mean? Like when I was younger, I had just accepted that being good was the ultimate purpose. And so when I had done that, what I didn't realize was it was making my life artificial. And I was missing out on the chaos. And what that meant is that there were moments in my life where there was resistance, and I was in some sense shielded from that resistance. In one manner, that shielding from that resistance was a blessing. In another manner, it was a denial of the next levels of life that had come to me in that moment. So for me, it's like you gotta care for life to recognize you gotta care for intelligence. Because what are we? Intelligent life. That means there's a lot of objective phenomena, but we are a unique, you know, billion year old science project, evolutionary thing. And as humanity, I look at our current societies and I wonder where is it heading. So this billion-year old science project called humanity, I feel I got a clue. I got a clue from nature, dear listeners. I got a clue from nature where our next evolution is taking us. And I feel it's very unique because there's different aspects, different cultures are approaching this. There's a sort of religious movement on this planet towards the evolution of their truth, and then there's also a technological evolution towards truth. That means everybody is trying to figure out what's going on, but they're using different, what do you call them? Different lenses to look through. So here's the thing. I just want to get these points out so then I could get to the core of what I'm trying to communicate in this talk. This talk has a different structure than the others because I'm kind of I'm going to share a sort of pattern I've noticed in civilization and in history. When I looked at history, I noticed a pattern. And that pattern was in regards to the response of the behavior of every human being that has lived, that in some sense has how can I tell you, has had to acknowledge their mortality, their death. So this billion-year old science project, it's as if the minds of people are coagulating and somehow having more of an eternal continuity than their physical bodies. That means William Blake is no longer with us, but his poetry is. A lot of philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche is no longer with us, but his writings are. So, in some sense, the mind echoes louder than the body. People will remember your body, let's say, for 100 years, but your mind is eventually it is contributing to a universal picture. And so this behavior towards the inevitable unknown is the greatest performance of knowledge. And this is why when people you see like athletes, you see musicians, you see dancers, when you see these people, it's like the performance is the completion. It is the full use of the potential, as if there's so much potential energy, potential greatness within the individual, it's not allowed. But if it is, if the inner identity is able to somehow dismantle itself in a way where it was never chained, when you, if you can attain a state of mind that is free before it has to be, it's an effortless, instantaneous recognition of an acknowledgement of how presence or how your personality is being present in a sort of conscious viewing awareness. So this billion-year-old science project, if we were to look at it, it's as if this first it was all the movement of nature, no languages, no stories, no meaning, just silent nature. This silent nature, eventually through some uniqueness of design, began in some sense changing and taking shape. It began individualizing. And the moment this creature was able to suddenly be like, that's the world and this is me, that was not just the spark of objective awareness, that was the beginning of the subjective realm. It was the first discovery of the subjective realm, that man could acknowledge himself no longer as just an a non-segmented movement of nature, but he became a phenomena that could now look at itself and be like, I'm in a world, I'm not outer world. And this is a product of a sort of evolutionary urge of the universal sector. It's like winds. It's like waves. There's so many waves hitting us throughout the day, and when you look at your thoughts, they get affected. But you don't. Most people don't realize, because for most people, their mind, their thoughts are them. They believe they're a thought. And I could be, I totally give the listener complete permission to feel I'm wrong, but I'm telling you, the notion is you can't be a thought. Your attention falls upon the thought. We oscillate between consciousness and unconsciousness. Okay, it's like we don't realize it, but every second we're blinking. Okay, when we are blinking, in some sense, the visual sense suddenly is gone. So blinking is like the heartbeat of the eyes. And so this blinking, in some sense, is a sort of suddenly no longer the world is there. Suddenly the world is there. Suddenly it's not. So I considered, I kind of brought forth this hypothesis that in my own realm of experience, it's a theory, because it's been proven to me experientially. But in regards to how others can acknowledge it, let's say it's a hypothesis for now. So this idea is that, how would I say it? Like, we are actually, I'm going to just steer this towards a different direction. In ancient Vedanta, and Vedanta means it was school of thought of non-duality in ancient Indian culture. And so this Vedanta, this non-dualistic frame of mind, where it took most people in many cultures around the world, is that they all started thinking they're God, or they're the experience of the God. And it's like religion said the soul is like the missed secret of God, and it's like God is within all beings. So many individuals on this planet in our history have reached a certain state where they have considered themselves inseparable. They are no longer an individual to a world. So this evolution that made us separate from the world, this thing that we suddenly the creature was able to look at itself in the pond and be like, holy shit, that's me, and that's I'm not what's just here. I'm in a sort of landscape. So that conscious evolution was the beginning of the subjective evolution. The subjective evolution began becoming a sort of inner observance. It became a sort of non-sensory presence of intelligence. That's how the mind appears. The mind is not the senses, yet the senses color it. So the mind seems to be a sort of containment of all that's in your awareness into now. So it's like how your senses are present has to do a lot with how the idea of self is there. Your senses will change when the idea of yourself changes. So, anyways, the way I'm seeing it is that movement, it was unconscious movement of nature. Suddenly, in this unconsciousness, creatures evolved to a point where they became conscious of their mortality. When they became conscious of their mortality, they began becoming subjects to themselves. to themselves. And as they became subjects, suddenly the subjective realm occurred. And then language contributed just the sense that there was something to say when you were an individual. So, as language entered our lives, we began becoming thoughts, and we dwelled in these thoughts for a long time. And our society, even in 2019, is centered around it. In other talks, I say back in the day there was idol worship. There's a story of Abraham where he goes to all these people worshiping these idols, and like some, I think it was in where the Kaaba in Mecca was, and pretty much like what happens is that the dude goes and sees people are worshiping objects as the ultimate truth. It's like so. What he does is he break when they're all not there. He breaks all the statues and puts like the stick or something beside one of the gods, one of the statues. And all the guys come back, and he's just standing there in the room waiting for all these guys to come back. And they come back, and they're like, "Oh my God, Abraham, did you break these? Did you break these? Abraham, did you break these statues? These gods of ours?" And then Abraham's like, "No, this God did it." And then they just came to tell Abraham he couldn't have done it. He's just a piece of rock. And then they suddenly snapped out. So there were people who came and broke the idols of man's worship. But now, in our current era, we can say we're more evolved than them, but we have just moved on to ideal worship. Do you see? And this is why there comes extreme behavior in society, because ideas make the being feel what they see is the only thing. So they lose the humility to walk with their species because they want to just march into their own task. Um, your greatest intelligence pretty much is non-dual. If with any like when Vedanta talks about truth, when the Upanishads you read them or you hear them, they become they become just glitches in the matrix of time and space. They become moments where there is no identity to even exist in time and space, as if the concept of time was for somebody late for work. But when that guy was no longer somebody, late for work, he was no longer obligated to that universe. So every self brings with itself a world, because your self has extended from the world. It has to have an illusion to think it's separate, because it requires that sort of evolutionary pattern. You know, it's honestly behavior, and behavior has an inner justification and an outer justification. If the creature's attention more goes on the outer, if you just take the path of intellect, and what that means is you just become a mind more than a body here. That means you don't care about your body. You're just conceptually thinking about things. Um, that's not good, because you forget that truth is not specialized. No one can own the cause of all. Do you see? So the point of it was, for me, I was like, wow, if religion was to be seen, like religious texts were to be seen as some sort of unique puzzles, like a codex or something, I feel that we would suddenly see that back in the day there wasn't science. Okay, science hadn't developed, and the way they preserved knowledge of how life occurred wasn't through stories. Now, in a normal story, if they wanted to capture themes of histories of their time, they would animate their stories. So, mythology, believe it or not, is an effort to share the states of mind of the people at the time. Some poets are on such higher levels than their writing that their writing is echoes that. So, let's keep going. From the unknown, we became known to ourselves. That was the first effort of our evolution. As we became known to ourselves, we became more individualized by, rather than just being all this data in one ocean, we became suddenly separate from the ocean. And how would I say it? It's like first we notice our bodies, our inner world, then we recognize, like in some sense, our ideas are in our bodies. That means our intelligence arises, uh, uh, the meaning behind the objects. You can't, I don't think anybody can ever be a materialist, because that means that the non-existence of mind. It means it's just all stuff, it's all a hallucination of nature, this individual existence. I feel science in a strange way says it has come to terms with that interpretation, but for me there's something more, and it's like this more unique simulation, like what we as human beings are doing that none of the animals in nature are, is that we are doubting our ways. But those animals in nature, they can't. They just, like, it's as if they have a sort of unique program of DNA and they just abide by it. But our unique program of DNA has brought us to this point where we have even given ourselves free will. Free will means behind your eyes, you're being God in regards to your thoughts. So if you were canoeing or kayaking in an ocean of stars, all sorts of seeking truth stop once the being recognizes the inseparability of the individual activity and the cosmic activity. And that is a sort of phase in our evolution where we started as individual creatures, like we are right now considering ourselves as individual, physical, um, individually conscious, physical creatures, physically organic creatures. Okay, now temporary creatures also. So as we are this temporary shaped formed individual like life form, where can a temporary individual being go? What would be the dreams of a temporary individual being? It would be the opposite. And in ancient mysticism and ancient traditions, spirituality was a counterculture to the blind norm as considered by many individuals of the time. It's a response to the data, and how our when we consider the being has a soul, that means two different dimensions are having a relationship. As if your body is your matter is the horizontal dimension, consciousness is the vertical dimension, their intersection point is, tada, you. So consciousness and matter are said, by the way, in Vedanta, let's say in the ancient Vedic mind, as uh, simultaneous. Your mind and body are like happening as the same moment. So I'm saying that when we look at our entertainment, when we look at our media industries on this planet, currently in 2019, we see a lot of people drawn towards fantasy and science fiction because it seems to be a world, the next world to enter. It's as if the staircase of paradise to heaven is not per se physical staircase, it's lifetimes, different evolution of way intelligence is kept. Um, it's kind of strange. It's like the person who went to look for universal truths began to realize the universe was always true. Intelligence has an instantaneous acknowledgement of its being. So pretty much what I'm saying, as individual, objective, language-bound creatures, okay, uh, we are now evolving temporary creatures. We're now evolving to the exact opposite. The exact opposite is where our subconscious lives. And your conscience seems to be a voice from non-conscious, so it seems to be in this subconscious function domain. What I mean by that is Carl Jung spoke about uh, various ways that the mind, the moment, in some sense, considers intelligence to be segmented. We're going to evolve beyond language. When we evolve beyond language, we will go towards a collective state of being. So you begin to see Gandhi, Martin Luther King, all their efforts were towards a sort of collective movement towards clarity. So this collective movement of clarity, it's like you suddenly see that group of birds in that sky, suddenly all were flying in a synchronized way, you know. So similarly, our human species will go towards that sort of collective presence. In this sort of collective presence, there's going to be a sort of unique thing happening. I feel individuals in their authentic, honest intention to live will begin to have to eventually merge their inner worlds. And as technology improves, the bridges of communication get built more and more. As communication begins coagulating, it means for the first time a unique renaissance occurs. That means globalization will bring a very unique renaissance. I call this the multidimensional renaissance. And it's going to be a very unique renaissance because it's multidimensional, because for the first time, to thanks to technology, and the efforts of various great people, we can now share our inner realities with the outer on a mass scale. We are much more connected as a species thanks to technology, but still we live in society mechanically. That means most people who work, there is repetition involved in their work. And that repetition will cause them to eventually feel like a cog in a machine. When you feel like you're a cog in a machine, you begin wondering about the value of your energy throughout the day and how much you actually see what life is. Henry David Thoreau says it's not what you're looking at that matters, it's what you see. What that means is it's not per se all the time. You just have to have your attention on objects of observance and subjects of observance. Sometimes you can just abide as the observer. Sometimes I get tired of language. I get tired of, not I get tired of language. I'm not saying it in a way where it's like a heavy coat I'm wearing. I'm saying like the burden of trying to keep an idea in a changing world oftentimes can be said to be an unnecessary hassle. That means it's like sometimes a being can attain an automatic like samadhi. Samadhi is pretty much a meditative bliss that arises when you realize consciousness is being existence. When you realize your mind is being your moment, you kind of get impressed by yourself. You recognize your personality arises from how the whole moment is present, not just how you think you are present. So you in some sense promote yourself beyond past dualities into a present call of universal, universally responsible action. You become realizing it's a duty to nature that has extended you, that you in some sense abide by your true nature. And the true nature, our true nature is lost. Our true nature actually is unknown. When I say unknown, it doesn't mean there's nothing there. I mean it's that uh, when you completely enter the realm of pure experience, eventually that experience to the depth of your concentration becomes attributeless. So whatever you look at for a long time, eventually your mind will put so many different ways of meaning into it that it will eventually see it's empty. You see, it's kind of like a young child who plays with a toy and eventually gets bored of the toy, right? That means it's like um, sometimes you got to change your world when that self cannot progress in that world. What that means is you just shift your universal axis towards a more honest acknowledgement of your own values. So, pretty much, I feel what's going to happen is that we're going to try to create eternity. And it's going to be first fueled by the ego's need to inject immortality into itself. But it's going to then reach a point where the presence of nature reminds the being how life is. So my fear is not fear, is nature, kind of what I'm saying. And the alertness and awareness just comes from the inner authorization you've given yourself, how much you've allowed yourself in this one lifetime to be who you are. For me, wherever a person's attention goes, they suddenly become defined based on where their attention is. For example, there was a time where my attention would go on technology specifically and engineering principles. I would just endlessly kind of look at different things that were engineered, you know. And my mind went there, my attention defined my personality. And whenever it shifted, then I jumped into the opposite. I went from realms of expert certainty to, in some sense, novice exploration of what else. Our greatness will require a realization that if when we sleep we dream, when we wake up at least we shouldn't dream. So all those people chasing dreams, they're in some sense just trying to uh, get to a future point. They're trying to make their own predictions true. For me, the thing is, you gotta be your master. Your rises through how you process data, and how you process data is how you have actually processed the data that makes up yourself. And the most important thing is contentment. Contentment is because it's like you say Buddha got enlightened. So what was an enlightenment a solution to? What problem was enlightenment a solution to? And the word Buddha means awakened one. So what that means is whatever Buddha said, it was as if he was seeing something about the world that was more than what everybody else was seeing. You can say even Galileo was enlightened in regards to the people around him because he could see something others could not. Okay, he could see that we were spinning around the sun, not that the whole universe was spinning around the earth. He could see that. And regardless of if people could believe it or not, just the fact that his communication was there was valuable. So, what I'm trying to say is that creativity, right now, most people's inner life on this planet is shackled by chains of various emotions in chaotic moments. That means it's as if you're a painting and there's a contrast. There's dark colors and bright colors. And it's as if your psyche, your state of mind is contained by various borders with various patterns of design. So for me, when I use thoughts in different ways. Sometimes I think in language, for example, when I give these talks. Sometimes I sit down and it's not in language, it's geometry. Sometimes my mind animates living geometry upon just a normal objective reality, you know? So what that means is for me, geometry has a very unique mystical value for me. It's like it's like the inner skin of reality, but in a more subtler dimension and in a dimension where mathematics is going to try to claim, but it cannot. That means there will come a time. I think it's going to be a while, but I feel in mathematics, geometry is no longer just going to be something in that realm. It's going to everything could become geometric in some sense. This is not just in a sensory domain. It's pretty much living geometry. It's matter accelerating through more clear patterns. Um, so an individual objective creature moves towards being a collective subjective creature, you can say, or even beyond that, an attributeless collective presence. That means we maturely return to nature, as if the child cried because it separated itself from the world. And then suddenly the child, after it transitioned from this world, it, in some sense, uh, the various rivers of, of, of lifetimes suddenly finds the one ocean. And so free will, everything can be seen in a good and bad light. Every person has a light side to them and there has a shadow. That means when the sun rises, you know, you think every part of you is lit, but you see there's a shadow. And the shadow is there to remind you that sometimes the light cannot go everywhere. There's in some sense the chaotic aspects of man's mind, because in some sense we opened our eyes through a wild animal, it seems. And as we opened our eyes through a wild animal, this wild animal eventually civilized itself by discovering deeper dimensions to its intelligence. The moments it found deeper dimensions to its intelligence, those dimensions, in some sense, brought forth gifts. One of them was a sort of, you can say, uh, the creation of language. And not the creation of language, that you can say the entrance into language. No longer an objective being, now your thoughts and your visions and wherever your attention goes. I'm just pretty much trying to say in these talks, you're not just a creature of language. Life's meaning is not just linguistic or conceptual or just subjective. Subjectivity is a sort of duplication, replication of truth, of objective reality. It's as if your mind is creating a hologram of this objective world that your sensory perception gives you, and this sensory data is echoing in some sort of room where your mind has recorded all things. That means the edge of your mind is actually all that you're aware of, just moving in, like, in a sort of whirlwind of attention. So you don't know how creative people are. Believe it or not, I don't believe in writer's block. I believe writers can block themselves. The world is too big for there not to be inspiration or creativity. It's just too big. Just try to look at it more, and you'll eventually see things that only your intelligence has permitted you to see. There are no laws yet, but I think eventually we are going to have laws on trying to become responsible not only for each other's physical well-being, but for each other's sort of mind's well-being, inner well-being. That means if the notion of any government is that, okay, there's 8 billion, there's all these people here, and what is their greatest effort? What are they all living for? And you see, they're living for advancement and efficiency. So let's say a country is as efficient as its citizens and the system that administers the citizens. Okay, the shield and the sword of the people. That's what the government, in some sense, I feel represents. Now, any sort of uh, let's say government would say, okay, any nation, let's say leader of a nation would be like, okay, we want a great nation, so we must have individuals begin attempting their greatness, and also begin attempting to allow, how can I tell you, sometimes being nice is allowing another person's mind to walk. Do you see? being simple in a complex world um, opens your mind's eye. Okay, I don't want to just say like there is this saying that says you live for something or die for nothing. But the problem is that that's something that everybody lives for eventually becomes driven by the change of the whole universal cycle. So for me, it's as if like every expression of my being is changing the moment I create it. It's as if like the moment you speak and what was just a thought now has taken one step towards manifestation. Now, if we look at it through the technological lens, probably, probably we're gonna want to be all smarter. So we're gonna definitely put machines in our heads, or put our heads in machines. Either way, you know. And that's a sort of way where we're going to try to attain that sort of collective rhythmic presence with all existence. We're going to artificially try to be God technologically. We're going to every person who you seek, uh, how can I say it? Technology seeks immortality. The more our technologies become conscious like AI, the more they will begin to continue themselves. If we have a sort of evolutionary return to nature, if in some sense people begin to realize we can run into uh, a machine, we can run into the box of technology, but at the same time, it's like there's something to this world that makes it strange that it's here. And it's like, I there's this book I'm writing. I call it God Likes Spheres. And I was like, what is this? Like the light from one sphere, the sun is coming into this tiny sphere, my eye. Like, what is this line between two spheres? That's the vision of the world, you know? Regardless of the amount of external freedom you attain, you will measure that external freedom by internal freedom. And internal freedom is not just how balanced and how settled your emotional self is, but it's also how far your sight will go based on an honest effort. This billion-year-old science project called humanity will evolve from being an idea to being a response, a responsible action. This responsible action is fueled by the integrative inner abstraction of conscious beings. That means when minds merge, uh, the greatness of many worlds merge. That means the way we handle our problems is by integrating our imagination. As we integrate our imagination, something unique happens. New relationships of imagination occur. That means when two artists talk to have a conversation, have an authentic conversation with one another, they in some sense are like two different chemicals reacting. And that's where inspiration often is found, towards the call for the journey. For me, it's like the fact that I don't know makes knowledge have a direction. If I felt I knew, life becomes boring. Whenever you're bored, you feel you're too certain. You feel you know it all. You know, you ask a bored person any question, they will answer you. They won't be like, I don't know. They'll just give an answer. Dude's bored. He wants to fill uh, the vacuum behind his eyes with moving particles, with moving thoughts. For me, I shifted. Like, I used to listen to a lot of music for many years. And I still do listen to music, but I changed it for lectures. And for me, I would listen to a lecture not as a student, not as somebody who's like, okay, let me learn from this person. I was like, what is this creature saying? You know, what is this human being saying? How is his eyes open to the world? And that's pretty much the value for me. When I meet someone, I'm like, how are your eyes seeing all this? And I begin to see eventually their behavior is reflecting how thoughts are moving their attention. The consciousness is like the space for thought. Have you noticed that? Just like how like matter is in space, an empty space. Similarly, thoughts and the ego and ideas of self and world and all this is in the space of attention. And that attention seems to be where the free will lives. The free will lives in your consciousness. Okay? And this free will is the entrance to the unknown. It is the death of the ego into the clarity. It's as if ancient Sufis back in the day had this saying where they would say, die before you die. That means kill the idea of death before death comes. And so many people are using a bridge in a wrong way without recognizing the value of using it in the right way. Your life has as much value as you see in it. Your greatness has as much value as you see in it. Your creativity has as much value as you see in it, because nobody has your eyes, nobody can judge. And I'll be honest, it's like my ears have been open to many voices, you know? But at the same time, if I was meant to look through the eyes of somebody else, why do I have my own eyes? If I was to follow the beliefs of another man, why would I have my own experience? You see, so you kind of take a step back from society. It's an emergency moment. It's as if we're all, drinking our frappuccinos in Starbucks, but in our subconscious there's an emergency alarm going on, because the civilization is losing itself. It's losing itself to the illusion of itself. The illusion of itself is an economically added evolutionary urge in the creature to fill the vacuum of empty space with a expansive story of life. It's very beautifully complex how intelligence is present, because it arose from simplicity. It's like simplicity was silence, stillness, nothing. And then this simplicity evolved into complexity, and this complexity, in some sense, is how can I tell you, is how movement and noise are being the meaning of the world. It is said that the Christ, Jesus Christ said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." That means at least religion had one statement like that. And so, what I mean by that is that it means the cause of the external effect has to do with the root of your attention, which is in unknown soil. It's as if you see the tree, you can analyze and conceptualize and visualize how the tree has roots in the soil, yet you cannot see underneath the soil until you dig it out, until you move the soil away from the roots. And that is, in some sense, I think what Carl Jung advised, which was the conscious exploration into the unknown. You make the unconscious into known. What that means is the moment you confront your fear, in some sense, that fear's data is being confronted, is being seen. Fear evokes into the person a completely new dynamic of activity, a new intensity of experiential movement. And it's so easy to be manipulated if you think you're a thought, because emotionally you will be incredibly manipulated. People can say anything and it'll cause depression for you. You will even live days looking for problems because you don't think you can find the solutions. You know, you justify the whole world being problematic. It's like there was this story, these grandkids wanted to do a prank on their grandfather. And so they put this stinky piece of cheese on the grandfather's mustache. The grandfather wakes up, and these kids who are always running around are all so polite, and they're sitting and playing with their toys so peacefully. And the grandpa's like, okay, that's strange. Why are these kids super like different than how they normally are? Right? And the kids just say nothing, you know. But suddenly, the grandpa begins noticing a smell. And he's like, oh my God, what is this smell? Did these kids, like, you know, crap in the house or some shit? Like, so the grandpa, what the grandpa does is he leaves that room, and he's like, this room stinks, and he goes to another room, and he's like, oh my God, there's the smell here, and he feels the whole house stinks. He goes to the kitchen, he's like, oh my God, it smells here too, and he's just getting crazy, you know, he's just going insane. He's like, everywhere I go, it smells. And then he goes outside and he feels he's reached the final, like there's no longer going to be a smell, and then he sees the smell is still there. And he says, oh my God, this world stinks. And that's the thing. One tiny problem in how the being has believed they are a sort of thought or a sort of pattern, have to be pattern. It's like that tiny stinky piece of cheese that makes the person devalue the existential process and the experiential process. You gotta live life because it's so unknown. Who knows? Who knows what inventions will walk in front of the eyes of man? What sort of patterns of innovation arise? What sort of environments and countercultures, how various countercultures are going to respond? If man's decency speaks louder than his vengeance, and violence is vengeance. Violence is it's a sort of magic. It's a sort of, I consider violence a sort of uh, delusion. It's a sort of magical hallucination. It's as if the person's anger is arising from a moment in their past where they couldn't confront the anger, so they made that other person feel what the it's like when an angry person wins an argument, uh, you will go thinking that anger has to do with it. This is why so many people, when they're trying to prove a point, they get angry and loud rather than extending the depth of their argument. It's kind of like we've extended out of the world, yet we're trying to fit into it and find our place. And that's the paradox. That's where a lot of depression can arise. You kind of should also take a Taoistic approach. And the Tao is very unique. It's a sort of recognition of just the flow of the world. That means you have no longer in that state of being theories, thoughts on anything. You're watching how it's all flowing as it is. As you notice this, you attain instant serenity. As you attain instant serenity, levels of your imagination open up because past memories can now be freed. Do you know there was I'm going to share with you a sort of personal chaotic experience I went through. It was part of my, I consider it my mind's journey more than my body's. But it was a moment where I looked in the mirror and I was in a level of, you can say, sadness or despair or some sort of inner anguish of a sort of deep conceptual scope. And knowledge must be brave enough to walk through emptiness. We must be curious enough to enter the black hole that is behind our minds. The black hole inside our mind cannot be entered. Sorry, the black hole in front of our like eyes cannot be entered, but the black hole behind our eyes can be. It's an inner exploration. It is the recognition that you oscillate between intelligent life and non-intelligent life. You're being yourself and the world all the time at the same time. But you you kind of make this puppet show with your own strings, which pretty much is how various archetypes influence your current personality. So, of course, I'm just one man speaking in a world of 8 billion. You know, I consider that we are evolving creatures, but our evolution has taken an internal turn. This internal turn has inspired tool creation, and tool creation has inspired a sort of notion that the individual's ideas are just enough for himself or herself. For me, your individuality, at least how I see it, is that anybody who thinks they have an ego, your ego is being constantly regenerated and reshaped in every moment of your experience. Every room or any environment, you move into, it shifts your inner structure because legit, objectively, you have moved from a point of reference. So how you refer to the world honestly will suggest your personality. Do you see? There's there was this poet by the name of Jalaluddin Molana Rumi. He says you must work in the invisible realm as much as in the invisible world as much as the visible world. What he means is that the same scientific or let's say explores attitude we have to the external reality, we must also have it to internal reality. And internal reality seeks freedom, external reality seeks infinite complexity. That means we're all trying to be infinite beings subconsciously because we're in the finite currently. And so what happens is that the greater evolution, like the first level of mysticism, like I consider this the intermediate mystic, finds union. Okay? But the advanced mystic enters the unknown without bias, without emotional direction. It's as if you enter that space without prior emotions. And so you watch how they arise. You watch how the moment becomes a part of life. This billion-year-old science project needs to be contributed to. It's worth contributing to, you know. Just like how in the Discovery Channel or something, like there was a whale who came and was around this, what do you call it? Came around this diver, and the whale came around those diver. It came around the diver because there was I don't know, orcas or some sort of killer fish that were around the girl. So the whale was protecting the human being. The whales are incredibly intelligent beings. Okay, it's like a whale and an elephant can definitely have are on a level of intelligence where they can communicate. But anyways, so the whole thing was that nature protected itself, and sometimes, especially in current society, nature must protect itself from itself. You know. But anyways, what I'm trying to get to is that eventually you begin to realize that humanity is worth uh, paying attention to. That means it's fine to not pay attention to anything like in school, I consider, but you must pay attention to humanity because everything being taught in school is advancing the being to be able to be a very able, functional part of just like society, culture, and just pretty much civilization's effort. See, people are now seeking organized greatness. They attain this organized greatness through a sort of self-help attitude of kind of endless hard work. But the problem is, hard work could be just foolishness. A person can try to push a building and say, "I'm working hard, man. I'll get there one day," but you can't really push the building. So it's as if make sure you're not working hard in a fallacy. And we're in the era of simulations. 2019, I consider the pre-era of simulations. What that means is I'm feeling an atmosphere where the minds of people are beginning to notice cracks in the system, glitches in the system of how they're not just a thought, they're an experiential phenomenon. This experiential phenomenon gets as much as influence based on kind of sensory data generation, it gets also influence chemically. And there are many factors that are, in some sense, various lines of subtler dimensions that are preserving the being. It's as if, as like while I'm speaking about, for example, like there's your nervous system, and simultaneously in the body there's the cardiovascular system, as if different dimensions yet working in the same organic mode, in the same world. Many visions are perceived. Like I remember in one of these mystical poems I wrote back in the day, uh, like I said that the earth faces many faces, but many faces face the earth. Or it was something like many faces face the earth, but also the earth faces many faces. And what that means is where you cannot avoid efficient integration. It will be the survival of, it's no longer survival of the fittest, it is survival of the uh, most efficient vision and greatest clarity. You must seek truth because truth is the foundation of the manifest view, and it comes from unknown elements of your intelligence. So you begin studying your mind and seeing how your mind, in some sense, is allowing knowledge to be there. And you don't do it in an never do anything in an obsessive way. Never do something without taking some time to study your whole dimension. Sometimes meditation is just kind of taking a break in the day and just taking it all in and seeing how you are being the being, you know. As we recognize that there's more to share, and that if the world was a more peaceful place somehow, a more tolerant place, innovation and genius would begin stepping out of this kind of shyness. There's a lot of incredibly genius people on this planet who have lost hope in humanity, so they never contribute to it. They let their talents just contribute to their own world. They don't care for the continuity of the whole species. When I'm saying the science project, we must add to it. We must help it. We must work on this billion-year old, 4 billion-year old science project because it's echoing cyclical patterns of intelligence. It's as if I was like, what is the civilization's rise and fall? So like, what's the point of that? And I realize it's an effort towards perfection, as if in this universal sector on the surface of Earth, there's a sort of unique organic uh, seeking of perfection going on, from creatures that have in some sense separated from the Earth to then rediscover it in a way where there's uh, there's more dimensions to the same moment. I hope this talk has served you, and trust me, eventually it'll get boring just living for yourself. Trust me, it gets boring. You recognize that you only have one lifetime to walk in this world. And my recommendation is walk honestly and gracefully. Your karma is going to be incredible. It's strange, but it's so simple, yet we don't even consider it. We don't consider if we stop putting our effort in what we don't even ourselves are convinced that we are, freedom arises. A new moment grants new design. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Study your intelligence, study your mind. You get one lifetime to do it. Much blessings and loves.